LA, you mentioned reimagining roles. Now that we have this superpower called AI, and we have so many new tools that are out there, and so something that I was talking about with one of our guests that's coming up in a couple months. I want to say it's the chief people officer of ButcherBox. Like a big part of their employee value proposition is that if you go to ButcherBox and you start out on the marketing team, but the work is so mind numbing that you just like can't stand it, you have the ability to raise your hand and say like, hey, like this just isn't working for me. And by the way, like there's a new type of role within our team that I see an opportunity for me to either create, or there's a role in another team that I've had an eye on for a few months. And so I guess my question is, do you feel like, with ChatGPT, Lindy, Cursor, Lovable, like this new tool set that we have, it feels like you can kind of like ramp yourself up in a new position faster than ever. And so, do you think we'll see more, I guess, uh, internal mobility where people are moving from like team to team? Um, yeah, I'm almost wondering if like that should be completely rethought as well. Because I feel like for the most part, at least most of my career, you pick you pick a department, or you pick like a function that you're going to become an expert in, and you usually spend majority of your career in that specific function, unless you make a pivot, and then you'll pivot for a few years. And so yeah, I'm kind of thinking out loud here, but any thoughts?
Yeah, I think we will see a shift from the org chart to the work chart. And we're not necessarily thinking about it in terms of, oh, there's a role over there I'm interested in, but there's a business problem over there that needs solving. And I have the aptitude, the interest, the resourcefulness, the experience to help make a contribution towards solving it. And yeah, so hopefully we're able to have more and more of those conversations with more fluidity and more kind of real time speed than I think some traditional internal mobility programs and rotations have historically been built around.
I have excitement on, I feel like internal mobility is going to enter a new era with some of these changes that we're talking about. I feel like, at least in my experience in the 25 years I've been in HR, like internal mobility is always been something that most organizations feel that they could do better. And so it's complicated, right? But now we're in a totally different market, and it feels like the stakes are totally different. The decisions that are being made are totally different. In fact, one of the quotes that I took away was Tiffany Stevenson's quote, or my interpretation of what she said, which is that performance management seems to be shifting from a gentle bell curve to a harsh bell cliff, um, with expectations like rapidly intensifying. And while that might be true, just continuing with the conversation we're having, like there's also this new tool set that exists for employees to perform better. Like there's actually this whole set of superpowers that we can now unlock. And so, Dashini, I would like any thoughts on that comment from Tiffany, and and specifically what HR leaders can do to manage this shift. Just building off of what LA has already shared.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was definitely a quote. So, Stephen, I think you understood Tiffany correctly. That was a quote that stuck out with me as well. And I think we are seeing that shift across industries. I think you're seeing higher bars across industries and less runway, right? To get to that bar. So expectations are escalating rapidly, but you don't always have the sort of corollary support happening at the same time. I think we are asking managers to become much better students of talent, right? How they are assessing talent, how they're growing talent. And I think another piece around that cliff that Tiffany talked about, which I think is really interesting and goes back to sort of that burnout conversation earlier in our chat, is that you might see a situation now where folks who have historically been perceived as solid performers they are now suddenly feeling like, oh, I am falling short against this new bar. And so that's changing morale for sort of these individuals as well. And I think the last piece, which is a big sort of cultural piece, I think for people leaders to keep in mind, is that when the bar is shifting in some shape or form, I think feedback becomes very high stakes. And so when someone is giving feedback, then there's sometimes the worry, is the feedback a precursor to an exit? And so I think that's another sort of cultural piece to be keeping an eye on. But Stephen, you asked like, what can we be doing as HR leaders sort of proactively in more of this bell cliff environment? And a couple of thoughts I had is one, when we're redefining what meets expectations or what meets high expectations at a company, I think transparency is huge. And so help employees understand, as HR leaders, help employees understand that what the new normal is and that it is ultimately developmental, right? We all want to be at places where the bar is being raised because that raises our game. And so I think ensuring that people understand that it is primarily developmental and not meant to be punitive. And I think the second piece, going back to what I said earlier, which is the managers, right? They're at the front line of the cliff. So you've got to be investing in them so that they're having the right conversations and assessing talent against the new bar effectively. And I think the last thing is to really name the shift very humanely. So if you are changing the game, be transparent. And Ellie, I think you said this earlier, understand that people are going to be processing this news, right? It is scary, right? The tech industry has been experiencing layoffs in a cyclical way for a couple of years now. So name the change and why. Why is this bar moving? Like, what is it in service of? And I think that can help employees sort of connect, right? Why are we moving in this direction? And what am I going to get out of it besides, upping my game, right? How does this make our business better? Ultimately, if we're all shareholders in the company's success, right, we want the company to be better. So those are a couple of initial thoughts.